when we went through the testing facility, and it was everything from looking at the performance of a horse. We got to see a horse run up to almost 20 miles an hour on a treadmill indoors, all the way through when we saw the feeding trials that, you know, you can come up with this amazing feed and it's packed with nutrition, but at the end of the day, is the horse going to eat it? You know, one thing I think that was even mentioned, you know, the high-fat diets were actually, they're difficult to feed sometimes because the high fats aren't as palatable. And you correct me if I don't have that correct, but like the whole station set up just for palatability testing and ensuring that, you know, when you're putting the feed out there, that the horse is eating it, and there are sensors in the buckets to see, you know, how fast they're consuming it and everything.
Exactly. And you know, Purina had some of that technology way back when I first visited it as an undergraduate student, and I saw that how they could measure what the animals ate and all those things, which was better technology than what we had sometimes in some of our university research facilities. So I was really impressed and excited. An interesting little side note about the fat in the high-fat diets for horses is that when I was in grad school and doing the higher fat diet research in horses, as I mentioned earlier, I guess we thought we were doing pretty groundbreaking research, which we were, but fast forward to when I came to work for Purina, I found out the history that while in the 80s I was doing the research in Texas A&M, Purina already had a patent in 1976 on a high-fat extruded nugget for horses, which ultimately became Athlete. And some people may remember Athlete as the first high-fat extruded nugget on the market, I think, from what I can recall. And it's the precursor to today's Purina Amplify high-fat nugget. And so when I thought I was doing really innovative research in my graduate work, Purina already had done research on a high-fat horse diet. They had the data, they had the product. The interesting thing was it wasn't marketed at the time because horse owners, as I mentioned earlier, horse owners, veterinarians, nobody really knew why you would feed high-fat diets to horses. And so as we evolved in that thinking and saw that, you know, yes, indeed, we can get them to eat it most of the time, and they can digest it, and there is some physiological benefits, especially to performance horses and some to lactating brood mares and others, but you can get you can get some benefit out of high-fat diets. So now it's extremely popular. But interesting thing is, again, with fat, even as popular as it is today, it's simply an ingredient, and it's important up to a point, but it's like so many of our other ingredients or nutrients that, you know, sometimes more is better, sometimes more is just more, and sometimes more can be bad. And so just randomly looking for the highest amount of a single nutrient is not always the best way to try to select a feed, because as you mentioned, higher fat diets sometimes become less palatable to horses, and they get to where they just don't want to eat that high of fat because, you know, if you think about their natural diet is forage, pasture, hay, and the fat content of that is generally around 2.5 to 3.5%. So when we get some of these higher fat diets of 10, 12, even higher percent fat, that's not always acceptable to the horse. So it's our goal at the farm to be able to develop the formulas that benefit the horse physiologically and nutritionally. And then, as you mentioned, we've got to make sure they'll eat it, because it doesn't matter how good the product is. If we make it, if they don't want to eat it, we can't help them.
Right. Yeah, I was blown away by the whole experience and everything that went to making sure that the feed was designed properly, tested, and working, you know, in actual active herds, but also, you know, the almost miniature scale mill that was producing feed and testing out the processing, so that when it goes to process, you know, we're still getting that same quality product for the horses. But for the trip in itself, it was a little nostalgic for not only my brother and I, but my whole family. You know, I was even talking to my aunt, and it was her father and her and my mom's grandfather who started our business, which we actually celebrated our 50th anniversary this year. And it was in 1968 that he bought our original store location from the Purina Mills Company. He was a territory manager for the southern New England area, and the Willimantic-Mackeys location was actually a satellite mill for Purina, and all the feed or the commodities would come in on the rail car, get loaded into the grain tower, and then they'd be loaded into dump trucks for carrying out to farms. So it was, as we were going out there, and I was telling, my aunt, I had this conversation the night before we went out, and telling her we were going out to the farm, she could remember my grandfather making those trips for different educational things and seminars and things like that. So it was a pretty great experience all around.
Oh, that's amazing, and it's one of the cool things about being involved in Purina is that there are those long time relationships and multiple generations involved, and it's just really exciting to be involved in a company again that has the history that we have and that has that multi-generational involvement, but then is also kind of on the cutting edge of innovation like we do. And you mentioned there at the farm, the feed mill and things, and one of the cool things about that research facility is it's extremely unique in that it's designed to be a facility that mimics what is happening out in the real world as good as you can possibly do. So it's somewhat of a working farm with really high-tech resources available. So we have a herd of horses. They're actually there. We have their quarter horses and thoroughbreds that we do the research on. We're breeding and foaling out mares, and we're maintaining that herd just like any other farm, a horse farm would be doing. But when other farms may be riding and competing and training, our team is doing the exercise physiology work on the high-speed treadmill, the palatability work in the pal barn. We have a lot of research. We've done some really amazing long-term growth and development studies on young horses with extensive x-rays and blood work and lots of things to try to help make sure we can nutritionally support young growing horses. So it's cool that we have all that there. We're able to get as close as we can to mimicking what's going on in the real world for those animals. But then we don't really stop there, because once we find a product or a formula that works there at the farm and we think we've got something, then we actually spend what we call our field trial time in the research program, and we'll take that formulation out in plain brown bags and we'll put it with our customers and folks around the country to feed the different breeds of horses in different regions of the country, and make sure that what we see in those controlled settings there at the farm actually do work out in the real world. And I guess for myself as a horse person, I have a stake in the game in that I work for the company, but I'm also feeding the products. My husband's living depends on these horses doing well. My son's living depends on his horses doing well. And I'm not the only horse owner in our group. Most of us do have kind of a personal stake in what we develop, but we're able to make sure that what we do develop, what we put in the bag, and what we say about that product, that it actually does what we say it'll do. And, you hate to say it, as many smart people as we think we are working at the company, you'd think that everything we dreamed up would work. But part of what is helpful for me is knowing that we do the testing there at the farm, and we do have some formulas we've tested and invested in and spent a lot of time and money and tried to develop that, we learn about an additive or an ingredient that's supposed to be helpful, and it's being marketed as being helpful to horses, and we'll put it in a formulation or we'll design a product, and then the data will just say it just didn't help. So that's part of the value to me as a horse owner, is knowing that if it's in a bag of Purina horse feed, it's been tested in horses to work in horses, the kind of horses that I'm riding, and I know it's supposed to work. And so on one level, all the innovation, the equine seniors, the amplifies, all the things that we've done that are innovative is exciting, but that level of confidence I have somewhat comes from knowing that there are things that didn't work, but we found it out at the farm first and didn't go put it out in the market and then go, whoops, that didn't really work. So again, lots of confidence in the products, and we continue to innovate. You know, you'd think we've been around forever. You'd think we'd have it all figured out now. We've been studying nutrition for many, many years, but we are continually looking for issues and problems out in the horse industry and things that we can either address or better support through nutrition. And I know you all at the store are carrying one of our latest innovations, our Outlast Gastric Support Supplement.
Yep, right.
Yeah, and I think hopefully your customers are seeing what we saw in research and what I see personally in my own horses, that we've landed on a new innovation that truly helps a large number of horses.
Can you take us through a little bit? You know, Outlast has been probably one of the bigger releases of a new product for Purina recently, and even now it's being incorporated into a lot of the complete feeds that Purina already has. Can you go through the purpose of Outlast and how it was developed or the reason it was developed?
Sure. And I'll start out by saying that, you know, the way we develop products at Purina is we do look out into the industry and we get a lot of feedback. We have some wonderful ambassadors who are, you know, at the peak of their fields, whether it's, you know, eventers or rodeo people, or we have endurance racers. We have a lot of different people out in the industry that are at the top of their game that will give us feedback and say, you know, I'm having this trouble with my horse, or this product's not addressing what's going on. So we comb through the research and the literature. And so in the process of developing a product, we identify a problem or an issue that we think we can help with nutrition. And that's where we start. And we'll work with different formulations, and we'll do different types of measurements over many years, a lot of times, before we land on the product that actually works. And Outlast went through that same process, where we looked out in the industry and we saw that horses were, a large number of horses were suffering from gastric discomfort. And that affected their health, their performance, how well they did on their feeding program. So you could have horses who were eating the best quality feed they could possibly eat, were being managed really, really well. But from the various stressors that horses go through, many of them were developing gastric ulcers or various levels of gastric discomfort. And that, as we look through the literature, there's been a lot of research over the last decade or so into equine gastric ulcer syndrome. And the consensus statement among veterinarians is that a large percentage of those are the result of having a highly acidic environment, higher than physiologically normal for a horse, and having that acid in that stomach for extended periods of time. And that tends to cause ulcerations or injury to the stomach, which leads to extreme discomfort in the horses. So we were looking at that, and there's various different ingredients or products on the market to try to help address that. But our researchers found an ingredient that we did a lot of testing on. And so keep in mind, Outlast came out in 2017. It was launched out into the world as a product, but you have to go back about 6 years before that to look at where all we've been in developing that product. And so what we were looking for was something that was unique and that worked better than anything else we could find on the market. And the ingredient in Outlast is very unique. It's a proprietary mineral complex. It's actually it's a renewable marine-derived source of calcium and magnesium. So it's a calcified seaweed, but it's a very unique form of that that has a really great buffering capacity. So it can handle a lot of acid. And we found through our research that using Outlast at the levels we've put in the product, that we can really help manage the gastric pH in a horse into a more physiological normal range for a longer period of time, and that just helps keep those horses more